Mr. President.
The Democratic Leader.
Mr. President, this morning, the Senate will vote on the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy to serve as Secretary of Health and Human Services. By now, it's beyond clear that Mr. Kennedy is not remotely qualified to become the next Secretary of HHS. In fact, Mr. Kennedy might be one of the least qualified people that Donald Trump could have chosen for the job. There are so many others who would have been better. I'm very proud that every single Democrat will oppose Mr. Kennedy's nomination, because Democrats know better than to elevate a conspiracy theorist to the top health care job in the country. I know some of my colleagues feel the same way privately. In fact, if the Senate held a secret ballot today, I'll bet Mr. Kennedy would never come close to becoming confirmed, and that many, if not most, Republicans would vote against him. I think most likely most Republicans would vote against him if there were a secret ballot. But sadly and unfortunately for America, Republicans are being strong-armed by Donald Trump and will end up holding their nose and voting to confirm Mr. Kennedy. What a shame. What a travesty. I urge my Republican colleagues to think very carefully one last time before rolling the dice on Mr. Kennedy. A vote to confirm Mr. Kennedy is a vote to make America sicker. Mr. Kennedy has made a living not by promoting public health, but by actively fighting it. Mr. Kennedy is the face of the modern anti-vaccine movement. Mr. Kennedy has spent decades profiting off vaccine misinformation. Mr. Kennedy told me to my face that he would, quote, defer to the president on issues as personal, as deeply held, as important as abortion. Well, how do we know that Mr. Kennedy won't just defer to the president, who is far from an expert on health care, on other issues and health care issues as well? It's simple. We don't. But if he can change his view and defer to the president on something as deeply held as abortion, the likelihood is he'll change his view on many other health care issues to the detriment of the American people. One thing he won't change his views on is vaccines, I am sure, because he's held that so deeply. My Republican colleagues should think very carefully before voting to elevate a vaccine skeptic, a conspiracy theorist, to oversee our health care system. If confirmed, I fear greatly that Mr. Kennedy will take steps that severely undermine public health, weaken safety standards, and put the needs of for-profit corporations ahead of the needs of American families. And sooner or later, public backlash is going to build, and Republicans will have wished they hadn't signed their names for such a troubled nominee. So one final time, I implore my Republican colleagues to reject the nomination of Kennedy to be Secretary of HHS. A vote to confirm Mr. Kennedy is a vote I truly believe many, many Republicans and most Americans will eventually very deeply regret. Now on costs, lowering costs for average families in the budget resolution. Well, my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, welcome to the age of Trumpflation. Trumpflation. If there was one mandate that Donald Trump had after winning the election, it was to fight inflation. Remember what he said on the campaign trail? He said, quote, "When I win, I will immediately bring prices down starting on day one." Starting on day one, he said he will bring prices down. Well, today is day 25, and inflation is not down, but actually up by 3%, higher than what economists were expecting. At the grocery store, the price of pork and chicken and beef are all up. Eggs are up 15% from last month. Gas prices are up 2% from last month. Used cars are up. Auto insurance has become more expensive. And what is Donald Trump doing about all this? He's making the problem worse by threatening trade wars with our own allies. Here's what the CEO of Ford Motor Company said yesterday. The CEO of Ford Motor Company warned yesterday that, quote, a 25% tariff across the Mexico and Canadian borders will blow a hole in the U.S. industry that we have never seen. That's the head of Ford Motor. That's not some liberal Democratic economist. The head of Ford Motor says that the tariffs will blow a huge hole in the U.S. auto industry. What he's doing on tariffs is, again, sort of like everything else. It's sort of a meat axe approach, a slash and burn approach, not looking at each individual case and seeing what's good and what's bad. Inflation is the #1 issue on people's minds. It was the biggest issue during the election, and already Donald Trump is breaking his promise to do something about it. And the American people are starting to take notice already, even though we're only on day 25 of Trump's term. A recent CBS poll showed that 66% of voters do not think Trump is focused enough on lowering prices. 66% of voters do not think Donald Trump is focused enough on lowering prices. And you know what? They're absolutely right. In the 3 weeks that Donald Trump has been president, he's been focused on pretty much everything but fighting inflation, which is the #1 thing people care about. We've seen this maneuver so many times before from Donald Trump. He knows that he has no real answers to fixing inflation. So what does he do? He distracts, he distorts, he says ridiculous and wild, strange things, hoping to distract the country from the fact he's not doing his job. It's why he talks about things like renaming the Gulf of Mexico. It's why he's talking about hotels in Gaza. It's why he's talking about annexing Canada. None of these things have anything to do with the thing that matters most, lowering the cost of living for average American families. And meanwhile, what are the Republicans doing here in Congress? What are my Senate Republican colleagues doing? Are they fighting inflation, maybe? No way. No way. Republicans are full steam ahead with cutting taxes for the ultra-rich, paid for on the backs of working and middle-class families. Just look at the gargoyle-like budget proposal that the House Republicans released yesterday. Republicans want to make billionaires even wealthier by raising costs for working people. The Republican budget slashes nutrition programs that help 40 million Americans put food on the table. The Republican budget proposes massive cuts to Medicaid, threatening health care for tens of millions of people. It will make food, health care, energy, and housing more expensive, all to cut taxes for the ultra-rich, hurting the middle class, raising costs for the middle class to help the ultra-wealthy. The Republican budget plan can be described in one word: radical. Republicans should remember well what happened the last time they cut taxes for the ultra-wealthy. It backfired with the rest of America. If Republicans try to cut taxes for the ultra-rich again, history is going to repeat itself, and it will cost them dearly at the ballot box. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.